Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Call 0345 6060 973.
10 minutes before 8 is the time. We'll continue our conversation about the aftermath of Blowtorch Britain and what you've seen in a moment. But let's pick up a little bit on a story that broke, nearly an hour or so ago. It's the new inflation figures. Joining me with an initiative to discuss as well about a strategy trying to end what's seen as a gap in healthcare provision for women. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Conservative MP and Chief Secretary of the Treasury Simon Clarke joins me now. We will come to that, I assure you, Mr. Clarke. But first off, as you will be aware, around 50 minutes or so ago, we had the latest for the CPI up from 9.1 to 9.4. A reaction on that, if you would. Also, of course, bringing into the conversation the possibility of the highest rate in the bank interest for some 30 years, suggested by Andrew Bailey. Good morning, Mr. Clarke.
Good morning. Well, Nick, we obviously have to address the challenge of inflation, as you rightly say. This is something which, if we don't get it under control, will obviously undermine living standards. It will undercut the UK economy's competitiveness as well. And so there is a clear responsibility on both the government and the Bank of England to do our best to address this challenge. I mean, I say that fully conscious that the drivers of this inflation are predominantly external, that is to say disruption to global supply chains resulting from COVID and the impact of Russia's war in Ukraine. But we will do our utmost to bring this situation under control as quickly as possible. The bank is confident we will get inflation down markedly during the course of 2023. And in the meantime, the government is stepping up with a package of support worth some £37 billion, precisely targeted to help families at what is an exceptionally difficult moment in terms of the cost of living.
What are the tools at your disposal to try and combat inflation, Mr. Clarke?
Well, the bank's primary lever, and of course the bank is independent, is the issue of interest rates, and they will need to weigh that very, very carefully in terms of striking the best possible balance. The government, for our part, is clear that we will act to have a responsible fiscal policy and that we will deliver a supply-side reform, which is the only sustainable way to improve productivity over the medium term. Our first principle as a government must be do no harm, and that's something that we take very seriously.
I note your choice of language. You're talking about striking the best deal for people. Of course, we are faced with a wave of potential strike action. Railways, Heathrow Airport, possibly Communication Workers Union as well. They see that their pay, they say they haven't had pay increases for some 3 years in some instances, and they're coping with this 9% hike, Mr. Clarke.
Well, the public sector pay increases that we've announced today are, by historic standards, considerable. They average 5%, but they go much higher than that for lower paid workers. So if you look at the police and NHS settlements, for example, or for teachers, lower paid and new entrants are talking more like 9% increases at the bottom of the pay scale. So these are serious offers on pay. The government's taken these on the basis of recommendations by the independent pay review bodies, which include representation from the trade unions. It's vitally important that when setting public sector pay that we balance wider affordability to the exchequer, the inflation risk that we don't want to inflame and entrench, and fairness to the people who do such an important job for our society. We are confident that we have struck the right balance today.
Noting that when the Conservative Party took over, there was a note left saying, I'm afraid there's no money left in the till, or words to that effect. The Conservatives have enjoyed a reputation of success concerning the economy and a degree of trust. That's shot through now, isn't it, Mr. Clarke?
No, it's not, and it's
Really?
precisely because, as Chief Secretary, that I don't want to leave any such note for my successor. We're so determined to look after the national finances. We are dealing with a pretty unprecedented series of events here. War in Europe, a pandemic which has obviously required the state to do things which we would never normally do. And yet, we are on course to meet all of our fiscal rules. We are reducing the burden of taxation where we can, and Liz Truss, my preferred candidate for the next Prime Minister, would like to go much further on that. But we're also delivering key investment in programmes right across this country which will contribute to the levelling up agenda set out by Boris Johnson. And I think the balance here is critically important. There is no easy answer to the current situation, but we are on course to meet our fiscal rules. The UK is not alone in experiencing this inflation shock and is managing it sensibly, and yet we're still offering fairness to people, including a £37 billion package of support for the cost of living and a public sector pay settlement, which we believe strikes the right balance and looks after the people who, as I say, do such important work up and down this country.
You mentioned levelling up. Let's talk about levelling up in the health sector. There's a vow to tackle decades of, I'm quoting now, systemic and entrenched gender health inequality in England, compulsory women's health training for doctors. What would women's health training comprise?
Well, we want to make sure that there aren't disparities when it comes to health outcomes for women. It's vitally important that we bear down on some of the issues which we know the health service faces, and that there have been controversies over recent years on issues around safe birthing, and we want to make sure that on an issue like cancer treatment, for example, that we are doing the very best we can to look after the public. We have a record health service budget. By 2024, it's going to be some £188 billion. We're talking something akin to the GDP of Greece, and we need to make sure that's targeted to best effect, that it's working for the public. We've been through an unprecedented public health crisis, and we are focused as a government on making sure that it delivers best value for the taxpayer, and women's health is obviously a critically important part of that.
How will we know if this new drive has worked?
Well, we'll be monitoring the upshot very closely in conjunction with NHS leaders, and it's about making sure that the data in key survival rates improves, and that we do indeed, through both primary and secondary healthcare, look after women as well as we possibly can. I think that's an important initiative. It's something which we take very seriously as a responsibility, and I know the new Health Secretary, Steve Barclay, is determined to keep up the tempo on this.
All right, last couple of things. As Chief Secretary to the Treasury, few have worked closer with Rishi Sunak, who of course was the former Chancellor. You're effectively his 2IC, second in command, but you're backing Liz Truss, not a ringing vote of endorsement in Mr Sunak. Why is he not suitable to be leader?
Well, I focus on the positive reasons why I think Liz is the right person.
Why is Liz more positive
to be our next
than Rishi?
Premise. Well, my backing for Liz concerns a variety of reasons. The first of those is that I think she has the most exciting plan for economic growth, and she's set out a compelling plan to lower the burden of taxation, to go for the pro-growth measures which our economy so badly needs, both to help family finances, but also to deliver the increase in our revenues, which will pay for better public services. And Liz is clear that she will scrap the national insurance increase that came into effect earlier this year, and she will reverse the planned corporation tax rise for next year. She'll do so on the basis of a new spending review if she becomes Prime Minister, and a different treatment of our COVID debt. I'm also drawn to Liz because she is so clear that national defence is such a top priority for her as she becomes Prime Minister, and taking our GDP on defence to 3% rather than 2% is, I believe, the right thing to do in a dangerous world. So it is for those reasons I'm backing her.
Shame she hasn't been Chancellor then. She'd have done a much better job in number 11, wouldn't she?
Well, she has been an outstanding Foreign Secretary. Look, I have very high regard for Rishi Sunak, but I'm clear that my support
he
is
didn't give us an exciting
for
plan
Liz.
for economic growth, did he? To quote your words.
Well, he's had to manage a very difficult series of global events, and I take my hat off to the Chancellor. I'm not here to do down his record, but I am here to make the case for what I think is the right future step in terms of where we go from here, and that is for a government led by Liz Truss.
So Rishi did make the right decisions at the time?
Well, he was delivering against the spending plans set out by the current Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. Those spending plans do not automatically need to be the case under a new Prime Minister. That would be my crucial difference with Rishi. I don't believe those plans should be regarded as set in stone. With a new leader come new choices, and Liz has set out very clearly the things that she would prioritise, which include tax cuts. I think that must be right.
OK, finally, as a senior member of the government, can you explain why did Tobias Ellwood have the whip removed quicker than Chris Pincher?
Mr. Pincher has had the whip suspended, but Mr. Ellwood missed a critical vote of confidence in the government. That's existential for any government. A confidence vote, if lost, triggers a general election.
He said this vote was advertised
well. This vote was advertised well in advance. It was known about deep into last week, and yet Mr. Elwood chose, without permission, to be on a visit abroad. I'm afraid that the consequences of that are well understood. These votes are absolutely fundamental.
That's a greater crime than what is reported to have gone on at that event in the club involving the former deputy chief.
No, Mr. Pincher had the whip withdrawn the very next day, and the point here is that the seriousness of what happened with him is in no dispute, but the circumstances took longer to clarify. And with Mr. Elwood, it was a straightforward yes or no. Was he present for a confidence vote in the government? He wasn't, and the consequences of that are widely understood.
When does he get it back?
That will be for the Prime Minister and the Chief Whip to determine.
I'm grateful for your time, Simon Clarke. Thank you, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, appearing to talk about this new strategy designed to end the health gap and provision of health care for women in the country. You're listening to LBC, 8 o'clock. News is next.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.